And I think we are live. Good morning and welcome. I call the subcommittee to order on trade. We thank everybody for joining us today. We're holding this hearing virtually in compliance with regulations for remote committee proceedings. We welcome you to the first hearing of the Trade Subcommittee in the 117th Congress. I'm pleased for the opportunity again to chair this panel. I'm proud of our historic achievements during the last Congress, most notably the improvements we secured in the NAFTA 2.0 and the broad bipartisan support that the agreement received in Congress. Before we turn to today's hearing, I want to remind members of a few procedures, these will be familiar to you, to help navigate the virtual hearing. First, consistent with the regulations, the committee will keep microphones muted to limit background noise, and we appreciate your assistance there. Members are responsible for unmuting themselves when they seek recognition or when recognized for their 5 minutes. Second, members and witnesses must have their cameras on at all times. If you step away from the proceedings, please leave your camera on rather than logging out. We will dispense with our practice of observing the Gibbons rule and instead go in order of seniority for questioning, alternating between the minority and majority, beginning with members of the Trade Subcommittee if we have outside members joining us. Finally, without objection, Representative Davis is authorized to serve as chair in the event I experience technical difficulties. I thank you all for your continued patience as we navigate the technology in order to continue serving our country together in this time of great need. And with that, I will now turn to today's hearing on reauthorizing trade adjustment assistance, opportunities for equitable access and modernization. As I noted at the beginning, I'm excited about the subcommittee's achievements in the previous Congress and look forward to continuing our work to make sure our trade policies support all American workers, consumers, farmers, communities, and businesses. The topic of today's hearing is critical in that effort. Trade adjustment assistance has been a key part of American trade policy for almost 60 years. Now, I modestly disagree with our distinguished ranking member about the need to delay TAA reauthorization until Trade Promotion Authority is reenacted. I see these as being on separate tracks. The Trade Promotion Authority will be done in conjunction with our new ambassador, Catherine Tai, no stranger to us all. But in the meantime, we need to move forward. For TAA, for those who've been able to access the program, has offered a lifeline during periods of economic distress, providing workers who have lost their jobs with the resources they need to get an education and training to be able to get access to good paying jobs in economically competitive sectors. The reasons that TAA is a subject of our subcommittee's first hearing, first and foremost, many of the program enhancements that were included when we last reauthorized the program in 2015 expire at the end of June. If Congress fails to act on July 1st, fewer workers would be eligible for TAA, and the Americans who remain eligible will receive significantly less help, both in terms of the amount of benefit and the type of benefits. And I think we all agree at a time when the economy is struggling, this is the last thing we need to do for affected workers. To make these matters more dire, the cost of inaction would fall most heavily on women and workers of color, the very people who have been hit hardest by the economic impacts of the coronavirus, indeed, as well as its health effects. Second, we are at an inflection point in our economic recovery from the coronavirus. As access to vaccine continues to expand, more and more workers will be able to safely return to work, and there will be increased demand for available jobs. We must not leave behind workers who lost their jobs because of trade policy failures. During the last economic crisis, Congress enacted major reforms and improvement to the TAA program. The 2009 version of the program reflected the high watermark with expanded benefits and robust funding. The threat that our workers and communities face today is different, but no less dire. We have lost, as we all know, over 540,000 lives, and the pandemic has disrupted all of our lives. Many Americans will be faced with an economy fundamentally different from the one that existed before the COVID crisis. Congress should act to ensure that the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program served any trade-impacted worker, firm, farmer, or community. TAA can be a significant tool in that effort. Too often, our trade policy presumes that we must sacrifice good-paying manufacturing and service jobs for lower consumer prices. In the process, we ignored reality that once those factories and service centers were shuttered, many communities lost a major source of economic activity and revenue. We must also acknowledge that not only has the coronavirus had a disproportionate effect on communities of color, but we have also more and more evidence that trade-related job loss often finds hardest on those same communities. In the last century, we saw union manufacturing jobs in the Midwest provide a route to the middle class for Black Americans who fled the Jim Crow South during the Great Migration. But when those jobs left America, Black workers were impacted disproportionately. In the out years, we have reports and studies that provide a fuller understanding of what happened to those workers, their families, to young people who are entering the workforce, indeed to their entire communities. We must acknowledge the evidence that trade does not impact all our communities equally. We must consider how our economic policies have disparate impacts on different communities and how we should redesign those policies to reduce rather than make economic inequality worse. Reauthorization for TAA for workers should be complemented by assistance targeted at communities to ensure that they can take the steps necessary to recover from challenging economic circumstances. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Spriggs of the AFL-CIO to better understand those unique challenges and how to assist them. I applaud the work that my colleague, Congressman Kildee, has already done on this important issue. As we prepare for reauthorization, we must consider the workers who have lost their jobs due to trade, but who have been unable to access TAA benefits because the layoffs do not fit the narrow eligibility criteria that currently exists in law. I would like our subcommittee to reconsider those criteria so that the program can serve all trade-impacted workers. A related problem is outreach. Many times workers simply do not know they are eligible for TAA benefits. For those workers who do access the program, like Mr. Otto, one of our witnesses, receiving those benefits can be a life-changing experience. I also look forward to hearing from Ms. Forsberg about how my home state of Oregon has set the national standard in reaching eligible workers and how the rest of the country might benefit from Oregon's best practices. We should also take this opportunity to consider how we can make sure that the benefits the participants receive reflects their needs. It's important for those who are eligible to see TAA as a program that can support them as they undertake training and search for a new job. I'm eager to hear from Mr. Stettner on those opportunities. Today's hearing is timely, and I believe a great opportunity to work together to ensure that we do right by these workers who lost their jobs because of broader global economic challenges. Now, let me yield to my friend, the ranking member, Mr. Buchanan from Florida, for 5 minutes for the purpose of his opening statement. Vern?
Yeah, thank you, Earl, and Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank all of our witnesses for being here today. It's a very important hearing. I look forward to working with you and our colleagues to build upon a bipartisan consensus that was achieved with USMCA and to create a pro-job, pro-worker trade policy. I also look forward to working with the new administration as it develops its trade policy priorities. I trust that this committee will provide vigorous oversight of the Biden administration, just as we have prior administrations. In my view, that should include ample opportunity for consultation and public hearings with administration officials before decisions are made, giving the lead role Congress plays in setting the trade agenda. Let's now turn to the matter at hand today. Thanks for holding this important hearing on the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, which is set to expire in a few months. This is an excellent opportunity to look at the strengths and weaknesses of TAA and highlight areas in which the program can be improved and made fair and more accountable. But I cannot help but wish that we were providing the same opportunity for two other important trade programs, GSP and MTB, that were allowed to expire at the end of last year due to inaction by this committee. We must move quicker to extend these programs. TAA helps address problems when workers lose their job, but GSP and MTB actually create jobs, which is what American workers really want. Further delays will cost more jobs and hurt the very people we are trying to help. I hope we can work together with this quickly. For GSP, let's restore the program's benefit for our workers and companies that desperately need them now, while we complete work in considering possible updates to the program. I also hope there's room for working together on TAA. There is bipartisan agreement that trade and globalization have displaced workers in certain industries. In my view, automation and technological advances have had a similar and perhaps even more significant impact. But regardless, getting dislocated workers back on their feet and into the workplace is where we can thrive is a bipartisan priority. And that applies to all dislocated workers, not just those that have been displaced by trade. That is why Republicans support making TAA benefits and the administration more consistent with other programs. Our overall workforce development system would be far more effective if it was consolidated and able to provide more streamlined services to workers down at the local level. And it would be more equitable to workers who have lost their job at no fault of their own for reasons not related to trade. I don't see a good reason why benefits for different types of job losses are inconsistent. It's unfair. We need to introduce more accountability in TAA programs by increasing the focus on case management to help workers navigate the programs more successfully. When I was in business, the most important part of my success over the years was customer service, and the TAA must provide better customer service to aid dislocated workers and make TAA more effective. Another failing of TAA is that training can be abstract and focused on obtaining a degree or credentials. I don't have anything against that, but it needs to be more focused in terms of the community and the workplace, rather than employer-based training that develops skills that employers need in an efficient time frame. TAA should be the means to develop useful skills. And finally, we cannot lose the sight of the need for a robust and dynamic economy to help get people back to work. Workers will stay on the sidelines if we are not creating jobs. Republicans have put forth a pro-growth agenda that does include just that. New trade agreements are a key aspect of this agenda and must be a priority. The longer we delay negotiation with new partners and continue negotiations with the UK, Japan, and Kenya, the more we fall behind other countries and surrender global influence to bad actors like China. We must lead with an aggressive trade policy that opens market for American exporters and creates high-paying jobs here at home. Let's get America back to work. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Buchanan. I very much appreciate your comments. I've enjoyed working with you in the past, and I think you've laid out areas here where we can find some common cause. I appreciate what you're saying about a couple of those items that expired. I think the thinking was that it was important with the new administration and some change in trade policy that we harmonize that. But as you know, I've introduced legislation, for example, with the GSP, and I anticipate that we'll work aggressively in the months ahead, consistent with what we're doing with TAA. But you've laid out areas here where I think we can make some progress together, and I appreciate your statement.
Yeah, and if I could add just quickly, you mentioned the ambassador, the USTR ambassador, the new ambassador. I look forward for you and I to get with her. I also appreciated the fact that the ranking member and chairman supported her in terms of the Senate confirmation hearings. So I think it's a good opportunity to take a look at what can we do together. What's the low-hanging fruit that we can get some agreement on and move forward in terms of the benefit of workers. And with that, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate your comments, Vern. That was, I think, an impressive hearing where we had both the ranking member and the chair testifying on behalf of our former colleague and soon to be the ambassador. And I think I look forward to our being able to work together with her on that and have a meeting soon. But let us now turn to the witnesses, if I may. Our first witness is Dr. Bill Spriggs. He is a chief economist at the AFL-CIO. Our next witness will be Ms. Shelley Forsberg. She's a TAA program manager for the state of Oregon, coincidentally.
You've probably seen that's what
the third witness,
chairman and a ranker,
Mr. Andy Stetner. Vern, you want to mute? Is a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. Our fourth witness is Mr. Thomas Otto, former participant of the TAA for Workers program. The final witness is Mason Bishop. He's owner and principal of WorkEd Consulting LLC and a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Each of your statements will be made a part of the record in its entirety. I would ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes or less. To help you with that time, please keep an eye on the clock that should be pinned on your screen. If you go over the time, I will notify you with a slight tap. I don't have a gavel, but I've got a pen. Dr. Spriggs, you may begin.
Dr. Spriggs will need to unmute.
Doctor? Well, let's turn to Ms. Forsberg. I know you're with us. Do you want to?
Sure. Chairman Blumenauer and Ranking Member Buchanan, on behalf of the Oregon Employment Department's Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, I wish to thank you for the invitation today to testify regarding the reauthorization of the TA program. Across our nation's communities, both rural and urban, are built around specific industries, and when foreign competition affects these industries, it's not just the individuals, but the entire communities that feel this effect. This entitlement program protects families economically harmed at no fault of their own from the repercussions of trade agreements as well as unfair trade practices. While Oregon is fairly large on the map, we're considered small in population. Yet in fiscal year 2020, we ranked #1 in the nation for new participants and tied second in training participants. This is in large part due to several best practices I'll be sharing with you today. During the height of the 2009 recession, Oregon's Trade Act program had many large layoffs, and in some cases with thousands of impacted workers. With case managers spread across the state, many of them had not seen trade certifications in their areas for years and struggled with program knowledge to meet the dramatic increase of participants. One example involved a company that had over 4,000 laid off workers in one location. It literally took every case manager across our state to serve this population. With Oregon large on the map, this meant sending staff 400+ miles away a week at a time to serve our affected worker groups. Therefore, we centralized our case management team. It helped us serve large populations while providing consistency, ensuring compliance, and producing audit-worthy files. Because our case management unit has been centralized for the last 10 years providing services virtually, we were able to transition smoothly during COVID to deliver the same quality of services from home. Oregon served more customers in 2020 during COVID than were served in 2019. We realized there was a need in our local offices outside the scope of case management. This need was about outreach and education, identifying job opportunities like OJT, apprenticeship, and leveraging resources with our partners in our local workforce system, and collaborating with our Oregon Regional Business Service teams while increasing our customer uptake of services. The navigator position was created in collaboration with our local and state partners with these goals in mind and has yielded us the following improvements. The Trade Act Navigator is embedded in our local rapid response identification and planning. This allows for specific questions to be brainstormed before reaching out to a company in order to better identify trade impacts. There's a higher level of dedicated and intentional outreach upfront. We offer offboarding services that our employers can partner in. It allows us to dynamically adjust to changing regional needs and stay up. Both staff and affected workers are more educated on the labor market for each region. Our case managers partner with the Trade Act navigators in the field to identify worker needs and make proper referrals to resolve barriers and address immediate needs, resulting in braiding resources together to better serve the customer and increase their success and retention. The petition coordinator position was created because we saw a need in Oregon for thinking differently about trade in general with our employers. There were many layoffs and plant closures during the recession, yet petitions weren't being filed. Customers weren't asking for them to be filed, employers weren't asking, but we could see connections industry-wide to foreign trade issues. For example, Canada and lumber or China and electronics. We found that employers would tell us that the layoff was due to financial mismanagement, bankruptcy, etc., and yet we knew those industries were hard hit, so we decided to start testing the market by filing petitions on our own, and sure enough, they came back certified. We began building relationships with individual Department of Labor investigators so we could learn more about why some certified while others didn't. This educated us on how to file stronger petitions. More details on these and other best practices are found in our written testimony and attachment. Oregon TAA understands the value of the TA program and strongly supports reauthorization of this life-changing program. Reauthorization of the TA program supports the American's dream of reinvention and creates opportunity of thrive rather than survive. Hardworking, trade-affected workers and their families deserve the protection of entitlement benefits so that they may re-enter the economy and confidently and competitively, which the TA program uniquely provides. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the TA program reauthorization. Congressional implementation of Oregon's TAA reauthorization recommendations found in our written testimony will result in a larger number of trade-affected workers reskilling and re-energizing the economy. The TA program will be better integrated with the greater workforce system and have the infrastructure and accountability needed to ensure Americans can rely upon and trust their public servants.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Dr. Spriggs, could I turn to you? Doctor? We're not hearing you, Doctor. Can you unmute?
I read his lips. I think he says we're working on it.
Okay. I appreciate our interpreter, Congressman Kildee. Thank you, sir. Why don't we now turn to Dr. Stetner while we deal with the technology for Dr. Spriggs.
Good morning. Subcommittee Chair Blumenauer and Ranking Member Buchanan and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate this opportunity to testify before you. I serve as Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation, one of the nation's oldest policy think tanks. I've studied and advocate on behalf of unemployed workers for the past 20 years, having had the chance to learn about TA directly from dislocated workers and from the legal advocates, labor leaders, and state officials that serve them. TA should represent a promise to workers and communities that they won't be left behind when they've lost their livelihood due to the vicissitudes of global trade and trade policies. No matter how much our trade policies improve, the wage differences between the US and other countries to continue to lead to negative employment consequences of trade. As it stands today, TA is a critical resource for trade-impacted workers, as it provides a package of assistance that is much more complete than other programs. Includes up to 104 additional weeks of trade readjustment assistance benefits, $13,600 per participant in training, including up to 2-year degrees, continued health benefits through the healthcare tax credit, up to $10,000 in wage insurance, as well as relocation and job search allowances and case management and reemployment services. TAA has proven over and over again its ability to do the tremendously difficult job of helping older mid-career workers get back on their feet after losing their life's work. In 2018, more than 76% of TAA participants were employed within 2 quarters of exiting TAA, higher than the WIOA program for the same time. The TAA program has been criticized on the basis of a flawed evaluation that studied 4 years of earnings, which included up to 2 years of time out of training. A more recent study with a better comparison group comparing differences among workers approved or denied TAA found that workers who received TAA training earned $50,000 more over a 10-year period, a benefit that far exceeded the cost of the services. But these benefits and services are at risk. TAA was expanded starting in 2002 and then through the Recovery Act, including increased weeks of benefits, more funding for training, and eligibility for service and public sector workers who are more likely to be women and people of color. These expansions were significantly rolled back in 2014, and TAA activity declined as well before being partially restored in 2015. These expansions will expire on June 30th unless Congress acts before that time, and the law will largely revert to its 2014 state, with service sector workers eliminated, no funding for case management services, shorter deadlines for enrollment, and less access to wage insurance. As was done in 2009 in response to the Great Recession, the TAA program should be made more robust to facilitate the economy's transition from pandemic crisis to recovery, with streamlined eligibility, more effective training, more flexible services, and community assistance. More detailed recommendations for reauthorization can be found in my written statement, but let me highlight a few areas. Eligibility requires a laborious workplace by workplace petitioning process. Streamlined eligibility could be done through an improved layoff notification that flag companies that move job overseas, or by resurrecting a proposal made by Senator Baucus in 2007 to allow for industry-wide certifications. Training outcomes can be improved by restarting the TACT grant program that helped community colleges start nearly 2,000 new training programs in high demand occupation. Moreover, the TAA law should eliminate a provision that disqualifies individuals from receiving their TRA benefits if they chose work-based apprenticeship instead of classroom learning. TAA must do a better job of reaching and serving all those eligible for benefits. For example, both Hispanics and African Americans are underrepresented in the TAA population. One concrete step is to set aside funding to partner with unions and other workers to conduct outreach to impacted workers. As Shelley knows, dislocated workers are often reticent about participating, enrolling in government programs, educational programs. TAA does not currently deal with a community-wide decline in jobs. While TAA is focused on services for individual workers, reemployment strategies simply cannot work if there are not jobs available. Additional economic development assistance, starting with regional planning and including aid for remediation and infrastructure and development, should be targeted at communities with major trade certified losses. This is particularly important for manufacturing. Inclusion, I recommend the committee for turning its attention to this program, encourage it to act and improve TA before it reverts back to a weaker state. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Spriggs, are we live yet? No, I think not. Let me turn then to Mr. Otto. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to join. Okay, I hope everyone is doing well. And let me first start off by giving you a little background on myself. My name is Thomas Otto. I'm 33 years old, and I live in Winona, New Jersey, which is located right next to Woodbury, New Jersey. I am married and I have 2 children, 2 boys. I started my career after going to vocational school in the union Boilermaker trade, where I served a 4-year apprenticeship from 2007 to 2011. During my apprenticeship, I noticed there was no work in the trades. So I made the transition from my apprenticeship to doing what they would call tank work, where I maintained and repaired above ground oil storage tanks that you would see in a local refinery, chemical refinery, or logistics terminal. While I was doing the tank work, I was putting applications in for companies, interviewing for roles, kept getting declines until DuPont gave me the opportunity to be hired as a mechanical technician. At that point, it was 2013. I was hired on as a mechanical technician, where I learned additional trades, which would be pipe fitter, additional boilermaker, millwright work. At that point, I worked there from 2013 to 2018 when I lost my job due to them shipping my job overseas. While I was at DuPont, I was very active in our local union, United Steelworkers, Local 943. I served as a shop steward from 2013 till 2016. In 2016, I took on a little more role in the union, and I actually became a union rep as well as a union board member while still doing my job at DuPont. In the end of February of 2018, I received a phone call that management would like to meet with us to discuss something that they couldn't tell us about. I was a little worried because we already had a meeting scheduled for that day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. At 7 a.m. on March 1st, 2018, I was told that I would be losing my job and that my job would be getting shipped overseas, where DuPont would no longer be making the Kevlar or Nomex chemicals, but instead receiving it from a company over in India, where it would be shipped over and put into a tank on American soil. And that's how they would get by the loophole for the Kevlar made for the American soldiers and the Nomex, that it came into a product that was in a tank in American soil. At that point, I had to make a transition where I had to represent my membership. I hosted a lot of on-site interviews with PSC&G and other companies, and I was not sure where I was going to go. After having all that going on, about the end of my last month at DuPont, I received 2 job offers. One I accepted, and I thought it would be my dream job. I'll be back in the oil refinery as a mechanic, but it was 86 miles away from my house, an hour-and-a-half ride. And it just didn't feel right on my second day. On my way home, I received a phone call from my international rep telling me about the TAA program and that I got approved, and that DuPont HR and the international worked together to get it approved as fast as possible. And that we were very lucky because it's a long process usually. Went home that night, filled out the application, and on my way home, I received a call from Mary, who was my case manager, and we set up a meeting where she explained the program to me. We came up with a job plan, as well as a couple schooling options for myself. I felt very comfortable. It took a lot of stress off me, as my wife was a stay-at-home mom at the time, and I was the only provider. We came up with a game plan. We worked the game plan, and then when there was issues with the schooling that I chose, Mary was right there to help the whole time, which made everything a lot more easier. After completing the school, which I chose to go back to welding, and I learned a different type of welding procedure, and I got 2 certifications from the program, which I'm very thankful for. I got a stick welding certification as well as a TIG welding certification. Upon completing the schooling, I received many job offers, and my current job offer, my certifications, is what gave me the upper hand to other applicants because I had the welding certifications that the program had provided for me. And I would like to thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, I'd be more than willing to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Otto. Your story is very compelling, and we'll try and be respectful. We know you're just off work for a little while, so we'll try and we appreciate your carving out this time to join us. Dr.
It's not a
Sprague?
problem. I'm available for the whole meeting. My boss gave me off.
Oh, well, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Spriggs, are we live? No. Okay. Well, let's turn to Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I hope my voice is okay. I'm coming off a bout with COVID. I was
Oh,
last week, and I'm in my quarantined basement here, so I appreciate the opportunity.
well, you sound just great.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased with this opportunity to discuss reauthorization of TAA. I actually last testified about TAA to the full House Committee on Ways and Means in June 2007 as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Employment and Training Administration, Department of Labor. Now, as a business owner and consultant, I have gotten to see up close and personal the challenges faced by communities and families in economic distress, the bureaucratic hurdles often faced by community college and workforce development staff trying to address economic recovery and the reskilling or upskilling of workers, and the unnecessary complexities of the myriad of federal workforce and education programs. My testimony today comes from the perspective of a community partner who has seen the TAA program in action, most notably during the past year with COVID, impacting training timelines and in-person training methods. I'm offering key programmatic principles that will help more workers access training and reemployment services. And I don't get into every program nuance or element as part of my testimony. However, there are some very important foundational changes. We do know about the TAA program a few key points. First, little evidence exists that the TAA program provides a long-term benefit to participants. 3 different studies of TAA data over recent years shows little positive effect of TAA training. While the data often demonstrate that TA participants who utilize training have wage gains over those who do not participate in training, overall long-term wage impacts from training dissipate over a 10-year period. We also have seen an increasing number of TA participants who have bachelor's degrees, which has risen from only 2.5% of TA participants in 2013 to nearly 19% in 2018. Before COVID-19, training participation rates declined. Only 47.9% of TA participants utilized training in fiscal year 2019, and employment earnings outcome. So I offer 4 programmatic improvements and solutions as part of my testimony. First, often I say many of our workforce development and training programs are New Deal programs operating in an iPhone economy. Almost all of our programs have either a New Deal or Great Society framework in origins, and are ill-equipped to react quickly to market changes or technological advancements. COVID-19 has only exacerbated the need for Congress to consider different approaches and bold changes to programs like TAA. The first of my proposed changes is federal flexibility in the delivery of TAA. Too many of our programs contain broad mandates in law, both federal statute and regulations, and this includes TAA. Rather than try to direct outcomes through structured federal laws, Congress should take the opportunity of TA reauthorization to set broad parameters and desired outcomes for federal appropriations and allow the U.S. Department of Labor and states to tailor different approaches to labor markets, public health conditions, and socioeconomic conditions and population demographics. It is not feasible for top-down program design to meet the expectations or outcomes and help workers. Second, elimination of program silos. The Government Accountability Office and others have consistently documented the problem of redundant and overlapping employment and training programs throughout federal and state agencies. Even with the goal of one-stop service delivery through WIOA, most workers have to access multiple stops. In 2018, roughly half of TA participants were also enrolled in the WIOA Dislocated Worker Program, meaning different program staff are serving the same participants under different program rules, administrative structures, and even administering agencies. A TA participant likely interacts with 3 or more case managers, advisors, and/or employment counselors. A reauthorized TA should contain new demonstration authority to allow states to propose cost-neutral alternatives to providing TA services. This could include the braiding of funds and other innovations. Third, I also recommend increased access to training and transitional services through training and transitional services accounts that allow workers to shop for the case management, training, and other services needed. TA participants are not accessing proven training alternatives such as on-the-job training and apprenticeships, and the current structure of TA incentivizes longer spells of unemployment in order to access all the training available to workers. Rather than the current structured approach to TA training, a reform program will provide new training accounts upon eligibility determination. Fourth, I also then advocate for support for small and mid-sized community colleges. I was the first to come up with a community college training program back in 2007, which ultimately became the TACT program. What we've seen, though, however, is most community colleges in these communities are smaller institutions with 1 to 3 buildings. And I would propose that we have a community college training program that emphasizes opportunities for these smaller community colleges to gain access to resources to train workers. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions I can help answer. I can't hear you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We appreciate your bringing your background and experience to add to this conversation. I'm turning one last time to see if we have Dr. Spriggs. Evidently not. Well, let's go to questioning. I was struck, Mr. Otto, about your story about how you were able to move into this process, making a difference in a relatively short period of time. We had heard from the previous witness the concern that it was too fragmented and siloed. Was that your experience? How can you describe your experience and how it worked for you and your family?
Well, I heard about it from the international rep, and he said it takes a very long time for the application to get approved. There was one particular group that he represented that it was almost a year and they still didn't have an approval. Mine, unfortunately, was very fast-paced, and once we got the ball rolling, when I sat with Mary and we came up with the plan, and I went and interviewed in a couple schools, it was very fast-paced, and like I said, changed my life in the sense of got me back under the welding shield, got me a different type of welding procedure certification that I never had, which while I was going to school, on my LinkedIn page, I was getting job offers left and right just because I was going to that school and making a difference.
Great, thank you. Ms. Forsberg, you mentioned that your agency responded with filing petitions yourself. Can you elaborate on how you did that and what problems there might be or obstacles to doing it, and why, if it works, why others don't do more of it?
Yeah, I think when I started doing this work back in 2009, the issue was that we kind of waited for employers to tell us they were trade affected, or for a worker to say, hey, I think I lost my job because it's going somewhere. And what we found is just when we started seeing industry things, like we knew China was dumping metal here, we had seen that. We started seeing these connections and we're like, why aren't they filing? And then, the rule said we could file for them. So we decided to try that out a little bit. But the biggest issue why I think things aren't filed is because honestly, workers they don't really know why they're being laid off. And oftentimes by the time it happens, that company's filing bankruptcy. So in their mind, no, the company filed bankruptcy. Well, why did they file bankruptcy? They filed because they can't compete. And so it was just starting to really delve into that. And I think to the note that, yes, sometimes it takes time for Department of Labor to get those decisions, but in fairness to them, states are starting to file more, and we're not, and I think Oregon's ahead, like we've learned what is a good file and what isn't, and what do they need, but other states are just learning that. So when they send stuff in, it may not be complete. That means the investigators are kicking out trying to find things. So as the years have gone on, Oregon's gotten really good to know exactly what they're looking for. And we give all of our local area and our partners in rapid response and our union people the option to file, but they just kind of let us. So we have a dedicated employee, and we've added a second because now what we've added to that is we're looking at all of the laid off workers in Oregon. We run a BI tool off of UI. We look for 2 or more workers for any company, and we look at every one of those companies to see if we think there's trade effect and then file. So that just started in the last 30 days where we're actually using our layoff tools to do that. And so we're anxious to see what next year will bring.
And just following up briefly from what we heard from Mr. Bishop, it sounds like you don't have to have 3 or 4 different case managers or bureaucrats involved. It sounds like you're able to move pretty quickly on a more direct fashion.
Yeah, I really wanted to speak to that because I have a long history working for JTPA, WIA, and trade. And people don't always understand these programs are very different. So trade is an entitlement program, which entitles people benefits protection under the law based on whatever's happened, decisions we've made or countries, doing the wrong thing. And WIA, they actually are a wraparound service. So trade cannot pay for tires. So if we have a student in school who's driving back and forth to training and their tires blow out and they have no money to pay for that, we don't have funds for things that are not required of all students in that program. Our funding is very specific in what it supports. And so we braid together resources. So do we work with case managers from WIA? We do, but they're answering to us because we are the one that hold that case management. And honestly, they're so happy to have people. And a lot of times it's like we're virtually online with that other case manager and we're all talking to them saying, what do we need to make sure this is secure for you?
Thank you. Well, thank you for your insights and your enthusiasm. We're going to turn to Dr. Spriggs just after one more question here. Because Mr. Stetner, I wondered if you could just elaborate on what the impact would be if we allowed the program to expire this summer. What would the direct consequences be? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, we know that nearly just under half of all petitions certified last year were in the service sector. These individuals would no longer be able to, any new petitions would not be able to come in the service sector. The amount of training funding would go down to the 2002 levels. Wage insurance would not be universally available. It'd have to be on a group by group basis. So we really would, be limiting, the kind of benefits that would be available.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Spriggs, I have been informed that we may be able to have access to you now.
Yes, Chair.
Great.
I very deeply apologize. I want to give a huge thank you to your technology staff that took control of my computer and got this all solved. So my deep apologies.
No, not at all. This is the COVID era that we're in, the tyranny of Zoom calls. We're just glad to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Blumenauer and Ranking Member Buchanan for this invitation to give testimony before your subcommittee today on the issue of trade adjustment assistance. I am happy to offer this testimony on behalf of the AFL-CIO, America's House of Labor, representing the working people of the United States, and based on my expertise as a professor in Howard University's Department of Economics. My testimony today will reflect on a growing body of literature among economists showing a deeper appreciation of the displacement that can result in local labor markets because of trade. I think there is also an appreciation of the displacement that can take place for industries and occupations at the national level. The effects are larger than previously understood. Hopefully, the broader effects will inform reauthorization of trade adjustment assistance to include a broader array of help to American workers beyond the workers immediately affected. The assistance must consider younger workers in the commute zone catchment facing a tougher labor market for several years. It must consider a public sector that has fixed investments for a larger school system, transit system, sewer system, and other public investments that will have diminished population to support them. And a just transition from the impact of trade that is not incumbency will exacerbate racial equity issues by exacerbating competition for a smaller set of jobs and public investment. From 1966 to 2000, the United States averaged almost 177 million, averaged almost 17.7 million workers each month on manufacturing payrolls. From 1966 to 2000, an average of 17.7 million. with only slight variation because of business cycle. From 2000 to 2003, we lost millions of jobs and went to 30 and 50-year lows in terms of the number of workers employed. Economists looked at this carefully and understood that our old beliefs that you can't destroy jobs, you only can destroy job opportunities wasn't true. There are frictions at the local labor market level. Workers don't seamlessly get a chance to flow to other jobs. And the result is that in local job markets, there is net job loss of high wage jobs. And the result is pressures on the community that particularly affect young workers. The need is there for a more comprehensive program. What economists showed you before was essentially trade is like a broken limb. We know how to fix that. You just mend it. But it turns out it's a compound fracture. And if you don't address the bleeding, and if you don't address the potential for infection, you're missing the bigger picture. And that's the bigger picture that we've been missing. We need to enter into a discussion that recognizes that reality. Your committee can demand from the US ITR's office and from the Trade Commission better models. There are economists now who have the ability to generate general equilibrium models that incorporate this information, that we know local job markets will lose job opportunities because of these frictions. We can come up with programs to address youth unemployment, making sure that the Workforce Investment Board has the ability to create youth job programs for years to allow young workers a transition. We know what the ameliorating effects can be. We know that communities that have better transportation networks and have low commute costs are better able to adjust workers. You could have help for local transit to make sure that they can reroute buses and change buses to where jobs do exist. We need to have help for workers for a longer period because of this lack of jobs that will let them train as the community reinvents itself and creates new industries. All of these things point to more resources, not less. We need to understand that the costs of trade are bigger than what we understood before. Trade adjustment assistance is the place to start. I hope you will reauthorize at least what we had from 2015, but begin the engagement on these broader set of issues that we know have to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, Doctor. We appreciate your sticking with us and for your comments. Very helpful. Congressman Buchanan, would you like to question? I think you're muted, Vern.
Yeah, okay, we figured it out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I want to thank again all of our witnesses. Mr. Bishop, in terms of TAA, as you look at the cost effectiveness, we're talking about right now, expands about average, I guess, 510 days or 17 months and over $13,000. Is the taxpayers, does that make sense to you? I haven't looked that closely at numbers before in terms of the past, but I was just curious, are we getting a good return for helping the workers and the government? What's your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. It's hard to get into a cost-benefit analysis in a short period of time, but I would answer it this way. Having been engaged very deeply at the federal level in TA reauthorization back in 2007, and in fact, some of the 2009 Recovery Act provisions were things that actually I led in the Bush administration that got carried over into the Obama administration in that reauthorization. My concern with TA has always been that it really creates I think, an environment where it requires individuals to stay on unemployment insurance or stay out of the labor market for a longer period of time than they need to in order to access the training benefit. And I say in my longer witness statement, and I believe wholeheartedly with the TA program, that we've learned from other entitlement programs that if we create transitional benefits and opportunities for people to migrate back into the labor market, not create these sort of cliff effects of you get all the benefits or you don't, then I think we have a much more cost-effective program. And so my concern always has been about TA primarily is that we actually cause longer spells of unemployment because it's the only way the workers can access the training benefit and some of the other benefits. And that to me is the concern in terms of a cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, and let me ask you also, Mr. Bishop, there's a lot of talk about junior college, and that's great.
Yeah.
First one in my family finished college, but there's so many good technical schools that are locally, and there's a lot of discussion about minimum wage and $15. And a lot of people in our industry and other industries down there can make $100,000, $80,000 with good technical skills. What's your thought? Because every community is different. I'm sure in Oregon it's different than in Florida, and our needs are different. But what's your thoughts on that? Because if someone might go to a community college and get out and make 20 grand or 40 grand, but there's a lot of other good opportunities that are needed. We can't fill them in our community. We've got a long list. Everybody needs technicians in certain industries. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, again, each state is structured somewhat differently. And at its basic concept, a community college has two functions. It provides transitions to four-year degree programs, transfer programs, and also provides a workforce function. And in that workforce function, they have shorter and longer term training programs, both credit and non-credit, that lead to credentials for jobs. But again, this is why I advocate that I think we have to create accounts that allow workers to work with case managers and others to be able to purchase the kind of training they want. For instance, why shouldn't they be able to approach an employer and purchase on-the-job training from that employer, or purchase a technical skills program aligned to that employer? I think we have such rigid rules in these programs that we make it very difficult for the Mr. Ottos of the world ultimately to be able to meet certain deadlines and training timing and this and that. And I think there's just many ways we can create much more flexibilities and actually get dollars into the hands of people to purchase the training that will get them the skills for the jobs in that local labor market.
And the other thing, quickly, just to wrap up, what is the best way to improve what we have? I mean, I'm a big believer in continuous improvement. I think it does a lot of good things, but obviously there's more things that can be done. Are there a couple of things that you could just touch on just quickly, because we only got a few seconds left?
Yeah. Well, I would first say, again, listening to the alphabet soup of different workforce and training programs, let states have demonstration authority. Why have TAA and WIOA and this and over here? Maybe there's ways that they can meld those programs together in a more efficient way that get more resources to people for training. I would advocate, if there's any way you can have some kind of pilot or demonstration authority in TAA that allows states to blend these programs and blend these services better together on behalf of workers, I think that would go a long way toward, and I think you'd find states would come up with all kinds of really important innovations that would work for those states and their populations, and not have this federal top-down mandated approach about how we do everything.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Let's turn next to Congressman Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank each one of the witnesses. I'm going to begin with Dr. Spriggs. Dr. Spriggs, I want to ask you a question after I highlight a few points in your testimony, many of which overlap the testimony of Mr. Stettner, and ask you if I've accurately reflected your comments, and ask you to comment on the need to, as President Biden has put it in another context, think big, because the danger is not in thinking too big, but in thinking too small. Trade, especially trade resulting in direct competition with low-wage countries, has had a growing and persistent effect over the past 50 years, shifting employment from manufacturing to industries such as food service and drinking, with devastating economic impact on families and communities. This has led to a race to the bottom, zero-sum game, and it affects disproportionately are borne by Black and Latino workers and other communities, increasing historic economic inequities. The urgency of the moment, compounded by the pandemic, demands a broader, more comprehensive, more consistent, enduring approach to trade assistance, including additional weeks of support beyond traditional unemployment insurance, greatly expanding training opportunities, expanding summer jobs for youth, including union apprenticeship programs, expanding commuting infrastructure for broader access to jobs, streamlining the application process for workers with identified industries, expanding shared work benefits to keep the maximum number of workers on the job while compensating workers for lost income, more tools for investments to replace jobs opportunities lost in entire commute zones, expanded access to comprehensive health care, and relocation assistance when necessary. Does this summarize in a real sense some of the comments in your testimony?
Yes, Congressman, and thank you for the question. The problem is we designed the program thinking too small because economists thought too small. We have a growing body of literature that let us understand far better than we had before, that there are real, deep, and persistent effects on local economies and job markets. And trade adjustment assistance needs to reflect that. And all of the people in the community who are affected. And that's what I was trying to explain in my testimony, ways in which the program could be expanded so that it looks more effective. I think people's frustration is that the program isn't big enough, and some people are bound to lose because the problem is bigger than the solution we've offered them.
And if I might just, and obviously the special impact on Latinx and African American communities is compounded, and we need obviously special things to assist in another way those groups. Would you agree with that?
Yes, because when we take away job opportunities and increase job competition, it creates more space for discrimination, and this falls disproportionately on young workers as they're entering. And because younger workers tend to be disproportionately Black and Latino, because those who don't have college degrees who are young workers are disproportionately Black and Latino, it has a bigger effect on them. This is why we need youth job programs that include apprenticeships that allow them a pathway to meaningful jobs and mobility, and give them a chance to build up resumes, because we didn't understand before in economics how little mobility there was for workers, and that's especially true for workers with less education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Nunes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses today. I hope we can all agree that the best answer to someone looking for work is a strong economy that provides job options for anyone in the job market. One of the things that's concerned me are the executive orders that have been destroying some jobs recently, and I hope we can get back on track and get some of those projects back up and going. We've long supported in a bipartisan way on this committee trade adjustment assistance to reduce impacts by certain sectors of the economy that are impacted by expanded trade. We always want to look for new ways to expand the program and make the program work. And I was really pleased to see the testimony, hear the testimony from Mr. Otto. And Mr. Otto, my first question is to you, and it's really not so much a question as it is, could you tell us how you found out about the program, walk us through that process, and if any of your other friends and colleagues, coworkers, do they know about the program? I think it'd be good just to kind of get a little more information on how you got to the point where you are now, and congratulations on being a successful recipient of these funds. And I'll yield to you to answer that, Mr. Otto.
I found out about the program through my international union rep at the Steelworkers. He was aware of the program because he was actually at one point lost his job at a refinery before he became an international rep. So he explained it to us, as well as the HR at DuPont knew about it as well when they worked together to get it to go as fast as possible. A lot of my coworkers were older and they felt that the program wouldn't benefit them because they felt if they went to school and they got done school, nobody would want to hire a person in their late 40s, early 50s. A couple of younger people that were a part of the union there, they looked into the schooling, but they felt that being on unemployment too long was going to hurt them, or trying to find the schooling, the acceptance, the enrollment date would be 6 months out for the school that they chose to go to. I mean, that's my personal opinion on it and from what my membership when I was a union rep.
How long from the time you learned about the program that you were able to enroll in the program, and then how long did the training last?
So I enrolled and met with Mary in June. I had to go do an enrollment interview at the school I chose. I had to weld a little bit to show them that I had at least a basic knowledge on welding. Then after that, the next month I was enrolled in the school, and the schooling was 3 months long. So from June to January, I was on unemployment. January 18th, I went off unemployment, and I was back in the working world.
And how much did the money go directly to the training program, or did it go to you and you wrote the check for the training program?
The training program sent an invoice to the state, and the state sent a check straight to them, including the state paid for a welding shield for me, a pair of leather so I didn't burn myself, the gloves, safety glasses, hearing protection, PPE that I would need. Being that I went back to welding, there's really no textbooks per se for welding. It's more get in the booth and weld.
And so you've been, so what year was this when you started? What January are you referring to that you started?
So I started, my class started September of 2018, and I graduated January 2019.
And you've been working at the same job since then?
No, I worked at another company who found me through LinkedIn. I was working for them for a while. I was a contractor, and they promised me an in-house position, which never happened. So I started seeking other employment. I went back to the union, Boilermakers Union. I worked there until COVID. I got laid off in April because of COVID. And then my current employee, Fairlex Energy Solutions, we're a natural gas power plant. During my interview, I presented them with my welding certifications, which was what gave me the extra boost I needed to make me stand out. And I seen an 11% increase in pay from what I was making at DuPont to what I'm making at my current role.
Well, it's a great story, and congratulations. And it's always great to highlight the successes that we have in some of these government programs. And as a guy, I'm not a very good welder. I probably need the vocational training too, Mr. Otto, but we need a lot more guys like you. So thanks for being here, and thanks for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, on that.
Yeah, and one more thing. I know they mentioned vocational school. I went to vocational school, and at the time there was 850 plus applicants for 13 positions in the welding program when I went to vocational school. So that's another issue. There's a lot of people getting denial letters from vocational school when you're in high school, deciding what career you want to choose in life. So that's when they go to college, and then they fall behind in the systems and come out in a very, very bad position with that.
Well, we need a lot more people in this country with your skills. There's a big need for it out there all across the country. So thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nunes. Congressman Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing and for the witnesses. I really appreciate what you've been telling us, and this is a really important subject. I want to address an aspect of this, and Chairman Blumenauer mentioned it in his opening remarks, and it's the impact that big changes in our economy, disruptions related to trade, but as Mr. Buchanan said, also related to other disruptions like technological change. The impact that those big overarching changes have had on a specific subset of American communities is pretty profound. A lot in the Northeast and Midwest, but really throughout the whole country, there are these communities that during periods of growth and decline just seem to be stuck, have had a difficult time making the transition to the 21st century economy due to factors that are largely outside their control, which is what TAA for communities is largely intended to try to address. And that's the piece that I'm focused on. These communities are often unable to compete, even when workers can find skills. The constraints that communities face, the loss of population, the loss of tax base, the decreased quality and quantity of public services make it really difficult to create a competitive business environment that is able to attract the kind of capital investment that is necessary in order to match workers with skills with opportunities to work. And so I'm very much interested in exploring ways that we can use a market-based approach to supporting TAA for communities that helps reset those places, get them back to the same starting line that everyone else is at. So I'm curious, maybe starting with Mr. Stettner, if you could make a comment on how you think this might align with some of the principles that you've outlined. I mean, I'm talking about places that have had chronic distress. Gary, Indiana, Youngstown, Ohio, my hometown of Flint, comment on this concept, Mr. Stettner, and how you think it might relate to the pieces that you've outlined, which do depict, I think, a broader set of interventions. This community TAA is what I'm really interested in your thoughts on.
Yeah, no, I thank you for the question. You know, I think that we need to be starting with the strengths of our left behind communities and start with strategic economic development planning. And I see the workers dislocated by trade as part of the strengths. And they also have strong skills. But we can't just be competing to try to, grab a company from another state, or overseas by, trying to make it as cheap as possible. We have to build the strengths of those regional areas, whether that be remediating damaged sites, whether that be, additional training that's needed to draw an employer in, whether that be identifying supply chain opportunities, that suppliers that can be nearby, or other, economic strengths that need to be, brought together. I think there's strong bipartisan support for the programs under the Economic Development Administration, and those should be targeted to trade impacted communities. These trade losses, as Bill pointed out, change the whole character of a community, a pathway to employment, a multiplier effect. And so we need to be giving communities assistance to rebuild. And we have found that there's a very complex maze of federal programs. That's why we supported the Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnership Program that gave communities that committed to developing a plan, a partner to just even navigate the federal programs that were out there. And when you get to the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, there's a lot of ways that the federal government can help these distressed communities, find what they need to incubate new jobs and to bring companies. So there's already great models out there, and I think we can target more of them to trade impacted communities.
I think if you could just follow up on that, one of the things that's so important is that we create incentives for private investment. Could you talk a little bit more, you've written on this, how we might be able to attract capital into these places? We use the tax code to incentivize a lot of things. Could you comment on how that might relate to this area of focus?
Well, in particular, we know that venture capital is not going into the heartland. We know it's not going into manufacturing. So some type of federal guarantee that could back up private capital and incentivize them to invest in distressed communities, invest in goods producing industries. We're doing that already with some of our defense technologies and bringing them to market. And we do think that there's a lot of ways that this could be brought more broadly into the prospect of redeveloping distressed communities. Something like an industrial bank that might tag along with some of the infrastructure bank proposals that we anticipate, being part of this Congress's agenda.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Stettner, and to all the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. I see my time's expired, so I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Kildee. I see the drum set in the background. I thought there might be a drum roll coming.
If you get in the need of one, I'll do it.
Thank you. Congressman Estes, we have you here.
Good afternoon, or good morning, Chairman.
There you are. There you are.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also want to extend my thanks to the witnesses for joining us today. As many of my colleagues know, I'm proud to represent Kansas' 4th Congressional District, which includes Wichita, the air capital of the world. My district's highly dependent upon aerospace manufacturing, agriculture production, and many other exports. Many of my constituents have taken advantage of the Trade Adjustment Assistance, TAA, due to the frictional adjustments in the labor market due to trade. Over 95% of Kansas's TAA beneficiaries are in the Wichita area. While this program has its benefits, I believe that TAA needs to be reformed to be more efficient. These reforms need to be paired with the renewal of TPP so that Congress can pass ambitious trade deals that will increase export opportunities for my constituents in Kansas. In preparation for this hearing, we spoke with my local Workforce Alliance, responsibility for administering services for displaced workers. They stated that if TAA were integrated with other similar programs, quote, the result would be fewer duplicate employees, better customer service, more efficient use of public resources, and the local system being better able to equipped to scale up and scale down to meet the needs of labor markets and respond to large-scale layoffs, as opposed to waiting for the government to come into the rescue. We must improve TAA to reduce these inefficiencies so that we can get Americans back to work. It's also essential that we pair these TAA reforms with the reauthorization of TPA. I'm proud that the trade deals that we were able to negotiate alongside the previous administration, such as USMCA, and I'm looking forward to building on this progress by negotiating new trade deals, specifically in the immediate term with UK, Kenya, Japan, working with the Biden administration so that we can create jobs and support our workers and producers. However, this cannot be done efficiently without the renewal of TPA. I'm disappointed that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle let the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, and the Miscellaneous Trade Bill, MTB, expire, which cost thousands of good jobs for my constituents. We need to renew all of these pro-growth policies so that we can pursue a robust and aggressive trade strategy. This will help us to rebuild our dynamic economy and allow for growth, benefiting workers in my district and across the United States. I'd like to ask Mr. Bishop a question regarding improvements to TAA. I gather from your testimony that you have concerns about the alignment of TAA with other workforce development programs. I also have concerns regarding the differences between available programs and benefits for workers who lose their jobs due to trade versus what's available for other workers. Do you have suggestions on how do we harmonize the overall system and ensure improved access for workers?
Yeah, again, this is a much longer conversation, which we don't have all the time for, but your assessment from your local leaders is exactly what I'm proposing here, which is if you look at our programs, it's layer upon layer of silo programs that, just to give you one small example, the dislocated worker program under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, 60% of those funds go locally, 40% are held at the state. Well, the TA program, there's been mandates in the past that it has to be provided by state employees. So you literally have a potential dislocated worker who's required to get services from a local employee through WIOA and a state employee through TAA. That's just one simple example of a redundant and ridiculous requirement between these programs. And so we cannot continue to layer and layer and layer and layer these silo programs one on top of the other. It creates huge inefficiencies. These inefficiencies are well documented by the GAO and others. There's no question that they exist. And so therefore, I think the only way we get around this is to provide some kind of bold, innovative authority that allows for demonstration. Let an Oregon or somebody apply to the Department of Labor, and maybe they blend their WIOA and TA programs differently, but still meet the mandates of the law around who can be served. There's absolutely administrative efficiencies and other kinds of innovations that can occur if Congress allows the states to have that flexibility.
Yeah, great. I think it's important for us to support good programs, but my background in the private sector before I ran for office is want to make sure that things are efficient and effective and work together. And I know with our Workforce Alliance folks, we have peaks and valleys, and they need to have as much flexibility to do what they need at the point in time when they need it. So with that, my time's expired. I yield back.
I apologize for interrupting, but I would just say if we ran a
much.
private business like we run our workforce programs, we'd have been
Mr.
bankrupt
Bishop.
decades ago.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. I yield back.
Congresswoman Delbeni?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. I think we all know that an effective TAA program is really critical to ensuring that workers are able to compete in the 21st century economy, and that we have that we also have the domestic support to expand export opportunities, so critically important in my district. I'm encouraged that we're taking this opportunity to really examine this critical assistance that TAA is providing and the opportunities to expand and strengthen the program. During this pandemic, we've seen the impact of a lack of access to high quality healthcare coverage and what that has meant for many people. To address that, just last week when we passed the COBRA federal subsidy as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, so that individuals can keep their coverage and have the financial assistance necessary to do so. And that is very much needed during a pandemic, but those who lose their job as a result of trade face the same challenge even when there isn't a pandemic. Mr. Stetner, I wondered if you could talk about the importance of health benefits for those who are eligible for TAA and how the health coverage tax credit supports workers and families impacted by trade in a similar way to what the House just passed last week as part of the reconciliation bill.
Sure. Thanks so much for the question. I actually spoke to some Washington state leaders about the importance of that provision. When individuals lose their job and their health care, the alternative for many of them might be the marketplace and the exchange, but many of those plans, may not be available in their area to meet their needs. They may be very expensive, depending on their personal income status. And like all of us, we want to be able to continue our doctors and therapies and treatments that we have under healthcare coverage. Often that workers have paid into for many years and negotiated with, through their union. So the healthcare tax credit provision, especially, it was originally 80%. It was brought down and now is 72.5%. I think bringing it back to the 80% level would be one improvement. But I know it is a resource that is, really important, to workers, because when they lose their job, often they're losing health care, not just for themselves, but for their entire family.
Thank you. The renewal of the health coverage tax credit has been separated from the rest of the TAA benefits, and the last few years it's been renewed 1 year at a time. I was wondering if you could also talk about how this year-to-year renewal is a concern. And if we're to address the expiration of these health benefits before the end of the year, which are part of TAA, how long should we here in Congress extend the assistance for workers and their families?
No, I would favor the healthcare tax credit being aligned, with TAA. I think many of us have kind of always been on pins and needles. When the HETC has been out there on its own, and it's obviously up to you and others to make sure it hasn't been left behind. But I think harmonizing it with TAA and looking at a 5-year or 7-year extension, would be something that would make sure those who are operating the program, like Ms. Forsberg, really understand the suite of benefits that will be available, through petitions and their work with jobless workers.
Thank you. I just wanted quickly, we won't have maybe enough time to really have this discussion yet, but my colleagues in the New Democrat Coalition and I have been pushing for automatic stabilizers as part of COVID relief measures. Automatic stabilizers could be a powerful tool for ensuring enhanced countercyclical relief programs like emergency unemployment insurance are automatically triggered on economic downturns and adjusted up based on economic condition and trigger off as conditions improve. Have you or others done thinking about how to build automatic stabilizers into economic adjustment programs like TAA to support labor markets in distress?
Certainly there were times in my history where the TAA training funding was insufficient. When there were recessionary periods, like for example, after the 2002 reauthorization, when we had the high auto industry, issue. So I do think you could have metrics that would adjust the amount of TAA training funds available, based on either a national unemployment rate or on, a specific job loss figure in trade impacted sectors, like manufacturing. Those have, there's obviously things DOL can do to move around funds, but there's very difficult waiting lists and backlogs, particularly in the Midwest, during that period. So I think some provision to surge additional funds out to states during, an economic downturn would be one way that Congress could increase TAA, but perhaps, feel more confident that the funds will be there exactly when they are needed.
Thank you. Thanks to all our witnesses. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Congresswoman Miller?
Thank you, Chairman Blumenauer and Ranking Member Buchanan. And thank you to all of you witnesses for being here today. My district was hit really hard by President Obama's war on coal. Southern West Virginia saw entire towns decimated as a result of bad policy. As the coal mines were shuttered, entire communities lost restaurants, machine shops, grocery stores, and countless jobs. Under the Trump administration, we saw our economy start to turn around. Now, President Biden has announced a new climate initiative with a focus on green jobs. His climate czar, John Kerry, has even stated that he wants displaced workers to help build solar panels. However, these green jobs retraining programs have not been successful in the past. As we reevaluate TAA, we must ensure that we are not focusing on such failed training initiatives, but instead to focus on job creation. Further, we need to focus on policies that create jobs like TPA, GSP, and MTB. Taking workers that have worked the same job for most of their adult lives and retraining them is no easy feat. Coalfields Development Corporation in my district does just this. This program focuses on market-driven and employer-driven solutions, not top-down mandates. We can all work towards the same goal, and we can do this through strengthening U.S. rare earth mineral production, U.S. mining for metallurgical coal, so we can provide our steel industry with the resources they need to create the solar panels. This is the market-driven approach that we need to have. Mr. Bishop, I ask for unanimous consent to insert this article by Brent Orrell and Mason Bishop from February 16, 2021, entitled Biden's Green Jobs Mirage into the record, please.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop, in your recent article in Real Clear Policy, you talk about the challenges facing federal government green retaining programs. Can you discuss some of the facts that you've discussed in this article and how we should be focusing on creating jobs rather than canceling them?
Yes, I appreciate it, Mrs. Miller. And actually, I've had the opportunity in the last few years to do a lot of work in your district and in West Virginia, working with a lot of the community technical colleges, and they're doing a great job in West Virginia. Real quick, again, I would just emphasize that we spend billions of dollars on job retraining programs and reskilling programs. And we've heard Mr. Otto actually today talk about the training he got in welding and using, I assume, American Welding Society standards and TIG and other welding. These are the same individuals who are being impacted by the shutdown of the Keystone XL pipeline. So the Mr. Ottos of the world are exactly who are getting laid off and who are losing their jobs through those executive orders. If you look on the flip side, when it comes to green jobs, if you look at a study done at the Department of Labor, which we cite in that op-ed, a solar installer is a very low-skilled job, and it pays roughly $19,000 per year. So essentially, we have policy now through executive order where where workers who are high-skilled through welding and other technical skills training jobs are losing their jobs and being told that they can get $19,000 and $25,000 per year green jobs. I just think that's poor workforce development policy and runs counter to what these training programs are spending money to do, which is to upskill people for the jobs that actually exist versus low-skilled, low-wage jobs like green jobs, solar panel, and even some of the wind energy jobs.
Well, as Congress reevaluates TAA, how can we incorporate the lessons learned from these failures of the programs that you've described so that we can make TAA more effective?
Well, again, we need to be training toward market-driven jobs in local economies. And so welding is, for example, and we heard the list of people who are waiting to get into welding training because we've seen through what was the boom of the energy industry, especially in the Midwest and upper Midwest, very high-skilled, high-paid jobs that were becoming available in a lot of these communities. And so we just need to make sure that our training programs are tied directly to actual jobs and skills that are in demand and not some skills we hope exist sometime 10 and 20 years into the future.
I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you very much. Mr. Byer.
0.
Don, do we have you? Okay. I will.
Okay, I can't do it here. No, I can't put on this section.
I will move on to Ms. Sanchez. Then I will move on to Mr. Boyle.
I think Linda is there, but I'm happy to carry on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first just add something to what we heard just in the last round of questioning. I hadn't planned on speaking about this, but it's a subject I know a little bit about, and that doesn't happen too often. From a Pennsylvania perspective, we also lost coal jobs over the last decade, and it wasn't because of any governmental action. It was because of the free market. You saw for every decline in coal jobs, you saw a corresponding increase in natural gas. That is because the market shifted here in Pennsylvania. So much of Pennsylvania, as well as West Virginia and southeastern Ohio, sit on the Marcellus Shale. And so from about the latter part of the last decade, or I guess I should say 2 decades ago, around 2007, 2008, through the recent years, for every decline you saw in coal, you saw a corresponding increase in natural gas. So it was actually the market working. Now, as far as what I wanted to speak about in terms of the TAA, and it was nice, I was especially struck, it was great to have, well, all the witnesses, but especially Thomas Otto And while he's from New Jersey, I think he's from about 5 or 10 minutes right outside my hometown of Philadelphia. So I'll claim him as a local. It's great to hear that firsthand experience of the program working. I will say, though, I have certainly heard from a number of workers some complaints about TAA as well, areas where it is lacking. I don't think the answer, though, to that is to entirely scrap the program and to throw it out and let it go away. The answer to that is fix those areas that need fixing. So toward that end, I was wondering if I could turn maybe to Ms. Forsberg. If we reach July 1st and the TAA is not extended, could you speak? What exactly would happen in Oregon? What would happen with your job? I mean, what happens after midnight on July 1st if we reach that point?
So it causes several downwind issues. So number one, I think it's already been spoke about, there would be a lot of people who would no longer qualify. Petitions we wouldn't file because they're service sectors. Call centers are being sent overseas. So a lot of times you call your bank, that's who you're talking to. So none of those people would qualify. The harder issues are you're talking about every state having to reprogram their UI because we have several pots of UI that go along with trade, and though different pots of money, different programming would have to be made. Our IT is really hit hard with COVID and the stimulus packages that you guys have provided that caused, extra PUA and all of that. So states would have a lot of work to do in UI that they don't have time to do right now, would not be a priority. The other thing is really these, it's hard on our case managers because what's really great about this program is that the training benefits never go away as long as the laws are funded. So we have people even 20, 30 years ago who didn't utilize those training dollars. And during recessions, they come back in the droves because there's not jobs out there. So they go into training hoping I'm gonna train up so that when this recession's over, I'm gonna be more marketable to new employers and new technology. And so they come back to us because they have those benefits that they didn't use, because contrary to what people believe, we don't stick everybody in training. If they've got work to do right away, we send them to work. That's the goal, to get them back to work as fast as possible. So those things would not really be there. There wouldn't be case management. We wouldn't have case management to do. So people would have to access services, we would pay for services, but we couldn't case manage them because we wouldn't be funded for case management. The older laws, when it reverts back, there's no case management money, just the services money. So it's a huge thing, and our case managers have to know every law that you guys ever pass because they don't go away, because every petition number has a different set. Now they've tried to make some of that combined under the final rule that recently came out in September, but for people who were already promised more weeks of training or different benefits, they couldn't combine those laws. So my case managers have to know every single law you guys have ever passed. And when you let something fall, it diverts back to the old law. They have to start running that way, but they have these other people who are already under these laws. And then when you go back to reinstating us, then we have to give people options. Do you want to go to this law or this law? Because they're in this in-between place. And so it's a lot of work, and it's hard enough for the customers to understand what they want and what's more advantageous to us. So having that decision made before this sunsets is incredibly important.
All right. Well, thank you. And with my whopping 5 seconds remaining, I'll yield it back to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Harrington, looks like you're all presentable now with the sport coat on. Can I give you the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know that that's part of the COVID protocol to lick your hands and to get your hair in place. It's great to be on the committee, and it's an honor to serve with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to address these important issues for our country and continued prosperity. I am very proud to have worked on a bipartisan basis to expand trade opportunities by leveling the playing field and opening up new markets and access to new customers for manufacturers and producers in America through USMCA. So I want to thank the chairman for his leadership in that, and my colleagues for working together at the time with President Trump and his administration, and with Republican colleagues on the committee. Yeah, I go back to what Ms. Forberg said, and she sounds like such a passionate advocate for this program. And I love people that are passionate about what they do. And I imagine people under her leadership get real help, because oftentimes it's not about the program per se or the resources. It's about people who actually care. And she sounds like she cares. But I want to take her a quote that she said. She's talking about competition and the ability to be competitive stateside in the global marketplace. And she was talking about people who lost their job because their operations were insolvent. And she said, because they couldn't compete. I want us to focus, I hope we will focus on ways to be more competitive, so that we work on the front end of this issue to expand trade opportunities and create and preserve these great trade-related jobs. That's why I hope that we will consider these programs that have typically been put together, like the GSP and the miscellaneous tariff bill. Those will provide less cost on these manufacturers, less pressure to lay off people, and more opportunity to stay in the game. So I think we should be focused more on the front end, although there is a need for the safety net for all workers. My question to Mr. Bishop is, what are the trade workers under this Trade Adjustment Assistance Program getting that other workers in our economy and country are not getting? Kind of start there for me, because I've got a lot to learn on this program.
Yeah, well, actually, Ms. Forsberg talked about this a little bit earlier. There are two primary entitlements that TA workers get if they're part of a certified group, worker group. The first is they're entitled to extended unemployment benefits, essentially trade readjustment allowances, so they can get additional weeks on unemployment that other workers are not necessarily entitled to. The second is the entitlement to the training benefit, which again, most dislocated workers who are not TA eligible do not necessarily get access to training. Again, I won't get into all the details, but our other programs are inefficient, and very few actual dislocated worker WIOA participants actually get access to a training benefit because the money's not there. And so the TAA participant does have an entitlement to training and access to extended training that other dislocated workers similarly situated do not typically get access to through other programs.
So
that
Mr.
would be the
Bishop,
two-
just real in the interest of time, because I've got a minute left, and I
Yes.
appreciate that. So I'm interested in making sure there's not duplication of services, and I'm also interested not in not having a disparity of services, because we need safety nets that work, that are cost effective, not just for the stakeholder who is the beneficiary, but also the taxpayer. And you articulated that in your reform ideas. Last question, and you can take the remaining of my time and I'll yield back. But give me the bottom line. Is this program working? I mean, the bottom line to the performance measures, is it doing what it was intended to do and performing as it was intended and serving taxpayers, those who are benefiting in the entire trade economy?
I think it's a mixed answer. I think for some it works, for others it's not. Overall, for the taxpayers, I think we can do much better and run a much more efficient program and still get the benefits to society by having more skilled train and less unemployment.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you. Congresswoman Sanchez?
Thank you, Chair Blumenauer, for the opportunity to focus on such an important issue for workers. One of my highest priorities in our nation's trade agenda has always been to ensure that we put workers first. That means that we need to keep building bipartisan support and work on this committee to deliver higher labor standards and meaningful enforcement in our trade agreements so that we're competing on a level playing field. But it also means that we should do everything we can to ensure that all workers are able to pursue their careers with dignity. The TAA for Workers program has been the cornerstone of that effort for decades, but if we don't act soon, countless workers will be unable to use this vital resource as it reverts to serve a more limited population. And we just simply cannot allow that to happen. Not particularly when we're trying to rebuild from the worst public health and economic crisis in a century. But we need to recognize, as many have said, that the program does not serve the needs or reach all of the workers that it should. We try, but we still aren't perfect. And that's why our work to reauthorize TAA should ensure that it works better for all communities, or for as many communities as we can reach. Specifically, I want to raise the issue of TAA for workers whose first language isn't English. I'm a former ESL instructor, and I know what a difficult and time-consuming process it is for workers to learn a new language while trying to put food on the table for their family. So if we truly want TAA to set workers up for long-term success, we need to really think about support for ESL coursework, because quite frankly, to me, that's just a no-brainer. In addition, we also need to ensure that TAA for firms is inclusive of all businesses. There are 3.2 million immigrants who run their own businesses in this country. They make up 1 out of every 5 entrepreneurs. And we can't afford to leave even a portion of them behind just because the Economic Development Association didn't effectively reach out to them. So I'm going to start my questions with Mr. Stettner. In your testimony, you noted the importance of including ESL education. Can you expand on any other strategies to make TAA inclusive for minority workers?
Well, I mean, one piece that we had in the Recovery Act that I do think is important, given some of our educational disparities, is additional time on TAA for those individuals that need that time to do remedial coursework and ESL coursework before entering into a classroom or college program. We want, TAA is this unique program. People have the capacities and ability to do the schooling they never thought they could do, but they may need that additional time. And we used to provide them 26 weeks of that time to do that preparatory educational work. So I think that's a key piece. The final rule in 2019 did provide the ability for states flexibility to use TA not just as a voucher, but to establish additional programs. I do think that if a TA CCT program is reauthorized, there should be a preference for and technical assistance to tribal colleges, minority serving institutions, and other, and even HBCUs to gain access to some of that funding. When we come to TA for firms, I think you make a great point. Our economic development assistance programs need to be tracking the ethnicity of the entrepreneurs they're serving. They need to be looking at the diversity of the staff that is there. That's from MEP on to TA for firms. I think those are some ideas I would have to make the program more effective for a diverse population.
I appreciate that so much, because we often just don't even think of how do we reach those populations. Mr. Spriggs, in the time that I have remaining, can you tell me how can we ensure that communities of color that may not trust the government, that they're able to reap the benefits of TAA when they're needed?
Well, you heard from Mr. Otto that he accessed the program through his union, and unions are a vital pathway that people use to get access to these jobs. And as our union movement continues to diversify, it's a great entryway. The passage of the PRO Act by Congress would be greatly appreciated in making sure that a more diverse and greater set of the American workforce is organized so that they can have this additional assistance. And as you heard, Mr. Otto was able to benefit from an apprenticeship program. If you followed what Mr. Stettner said, you could find ways so that workers who didn't necessarily qualify with their skills to immediately enter into an apprenticeship program could be given that chance to skill up so that they could benefit from apprenticeship programs.
Great, I appreciate that. And my time has expired, so I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Congressman Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I was on the highway and couldn't safely stop. But I appreciate this. I'm real grateful for you to hold this hearing with my friend, Mr. Buchanan, and all of our wonderful witnesses. At the very beginning, I just want to push back on my friend from West Virginia, Ms. Miller's comments about coal. I represented all of Virginia for 8 years and very close to many, many coal miners. And it's difficult. There were fewer coal jobs at the end of the Trump administration than there were at the beginning. Coal has sadly become non-competitive against natural gas. In Virginia, we've mined our seams, so there's very expensive to get what's left out. And we're looking at the creative destruction of jobs for tens of thousands of people versus the climate impact on hundreds of millions of people. To govern is to choose, and there are winners and there are losers. But that makes it our responsibility to help the people who have been displaced find their way in the new world. Coal miners, by the way, are not the first people to be displaced. People that had record stores 30 years ago are gone. People that had video game stores will soon be gone. Internal combustion auto mechanics, of which I am one, are no longer going to be necessary in 20 years when General Motors and Volvo and everyone else have all electric cars. It is the nature of the economy going back millennia that there is creative destruction. Our responsibility as leaders is to react to that creative destruction in constructive ways. I have a question for Professor Spriggs. You said trade adjustment is real, but we make the assumption that the total number of jobs is the same and workers just need training to move into new opportunities, but that in fact the diminished opportunities linger in communities for long periods of time. I think specifically in Virginia of Buena Vista, Virginia, that lost a big manufacturing plant, or Marion, Virginia, that lost 2 big manufacturing plants, and they have not come back. Over tens of years, they have not come back. How does trade adjustment going to help that? And especially when you add to the fact that in so many of these folks, they're also tied to their homes that they own, but that there's no market to sell. So the mobility to get up and move to Silicon Valley or Northern Virginia just doesn't exist.
Yes, thank you very
Professor
much
Spriggs?
for that question, because that's one of the issues that I think economists told a fairy tale that wasn't true, and it's informed our policy incorrectly. It's like a dramatic drop in demand because it's the loss of the high wage jobs. And that leaves the community with an infrastructure that's too big and too expensive. It makes the community non-competitive. So I think depending upon the size of the shock to the community, like in Buena Vista, this is big by the magnitude of the size of the community. We need to take that into consideration because we need to give the community a long enough time to transition to get to another place and remain competitive. Congressman Kildee will appreciate the problems in Flint with having a sewer system that's too expensive for a city that has become smaller. How do we make sure that we help those communities or provide a better transportation network for the bigger commute zone? In Buena Vista, there really was no transportation. So these are pieces of the infrastructure we can help them put in place. We can help buttress to give them a longer time span to adjust. As for the young people that we really need to think about, because they, especially the ones who aren't college educated, won't have enough mobility. Programs that include union apprenticeship programs can give those young workers the skill sets to be wonderful workers for new employers, but also to give them the mobility. It's just that we have to think about supporting the community.
Bill, also, my friends, Ms. Miller, Mr. Arrington have talked about, let's get this economy going again. We've seen labor market tightness, the unemployment rates of 4 and 3.5% overcome some of the skills gap and mobility problem. Doesn't it make sense then that the American Rescue Plan that's putting an enormous amount of money back in the hands of people with a high propensity to spend will bring this economy back and the labor market tightness back much more quickly
But we've got a little technical problem here with you, Don, but your time has expired. Let me just thank you for your perspective. It's greatly welcome. And turn, if I could, to Congressman Horsford.
Thank you very much, Chairman Blumenauer, for hosting this hearing, and to my colleagues and the witnesses. It is a very important issue around how we can really aid dislocated workers who have lost their jobs or had hours affected due specifically to trade. The program is also meant to ensure that its participants from all backgrounds are supplied with the tools to gain the necessary skills and to competently re-enter the workforce. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity, because I think as we focus on building back better and more equitably and inclusively, we need to make sure that workers are at the center of that policy. So when considering the reauthorization of the Trade Assistance Act, we can all agree, I think, that this program has to be more robust in order to facilitate the economy's transition from pandemic crisis to recovery. Millions of jobs have been wiped out entirely by the coronavirus, and unfortunately, some just simply may not come back. The pandemic has forced businesses to plan for a future that of which included replacing workers with robots, for example. We have seen that the automation of jobs often speeds up during recessions. Companies are looking to cut cost and experience with new technologies. With that said, it's important that we consider significant improvements, for example, streamlining eligibility and ensuring that the filing criteria includes 21st century technology impacts. I've stated many times that my state in Nevada is one of the hardest hit states economically right now in the country. Overall, across the nation, the hospitality workforce has lost nearly 4 million jobs nationwide in just the last year in 2020. More than 670,000 of which were in direct hotel industry operations, according to the American Hospitality and Lodging Association. These jobs employed more than 30% of the Nevada workforce pre-pandemic. So not only are our workers facing the impacts of the pandemic, but they're also competing with this next wave of automation. The country has seen us move towards ordering off of kiosks and self-service apps. But in Las Vegas, we've already seen robots replace guest room attendants and bartenders. As the country continues to build back and recover, we have to reauthorize the TAA program to ensure that our workers and communities, specifically communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted, are not left behind. So Mr. Stetner, I'd like to know, how can we help support and position effective workforce training like apprenticeship, joint labor management training programs, and other community-based training that are tailored to the economic regions while also effective in supporting the dislocated worker through the process?
No, thanks so much, Mr. Horsford. And I really believe in your workforce, and when they're able to go back to work, they're going to put those robots out of work. I have recommended, however, that TA might be a model to deal with automation. There was a TAA for Automation Act that would have a lot of pilot provision for those who lose their job to automation in industries like you're talking about, service industries. I also believe that one challenge we face, with TAA is that it's kind of like a voucher, kind of like Pell Grants. You're, in lack of a better term, given the course catalog and pick what you want, by default. We need to give states some flexibility and resources. Some of that was done in the final rule. Additional assistance could be done through like a TACT grant program to give communities the ability to stand up sectoral partnerships between employers and regions in high growth industries where there is pathways for individuals to get into those industries. We also face a structural barrier when it comes to apprenticeships. Pre-apprenticeship is currently not an approvable form of training that should be in the law. In addition, we should allow workers to receive at least part of their TRA benefit if they're in an apprenticeship. Remember, when you're an apprentice, you're working. TRA is not available if you're working. One proposal would allow people that are making less than $1,000 per week to still get their TRA benefits. So there's a couple of ideas we have to improve in the way you asked.
Thank you very much. And I know my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I would like later to follow up with Dr. Spriggs around the issues of equity and impacting the TAA program. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Great. And I would welcome your sharing what you find with the committee. And now Congressman Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate this hearing. It's been even educational for me. One thing I wanted basically to stress is that I know this is a hearing about TAA, but it's also one of the things I think that's going to help our workers is strict enforcement of any trade agreement that we've entered into, especially the USMCA. And that's what, and if not, it's not going to, our workers are going to be continuously be at a disadvantage. So I'm going to continue focusing on enforcement, but this program has helped, as you all know, millions of workers who lost their livelihood due to globalization and trade, and it provides a number of things. In California, over 10,000 workers benefited from TAA in 2019. Nearly 70% of them found new jobs, and nearly 80% received credentials to certify themselves for their trade. I think Congress needs to strengthen this program. It's a lifeline for American workers and include targeted outreach to communities of color. And despite being disproportionately impacted by U.S. trade policies, African Americans and Latinos are currently underserved by TAA programs. The 2019 annual report found 66% of TAA participants were white, and over half of them, of all participants, were men. Expanding eligibility, in my opinion, to serve to the service sector workers would ensure more women and more people of color are receiving the support they need. And although the service sector workers comprise more than 80% of all private sector employment, they are currently ineligible for the TAA program. Along with structuring programs to reflect the needs of their diverse communities and for those who English is a second language, these improvements would have an impact on those who need it the most. Ms. Forsberg, what can we learn on the federal level from the success of the Oregon's TAA program in breaking down barriers for monolingual workers with limited access to technology and educational opportunities? What role, if any, has the concept of equity played in reforming your state's program?
So our department really values equity and inclusion. Over 25% of my staff are bilingual, Spanish, Russian, and Vietnamese, and the rest of my staff's been trained in depth on how to use the language services. With that NORPAC group, I did put that in one of my attachments. It was really a thank you to my staff, but some of the things that you have to keep in mind is you need to understand the culture in general. This is a culture who's afraid of government. And oftentimes if they are legal to work here, but not a US citizen, they're afraid to take advantage of benefits because they're told they can't. So you're kind of having to overcome a lot of those things. They prefer communication in person. And so some of the things that we did is we put it on Spanish radio. I had my Spanish staff reach out themselves to talk to them about the program and assure them of what could be done. We worked with our union because they were union connected and met at the union hall with these workers, and we had to do that all while under COVID with shields and the works and spread out. But I think the big thing I just want to say is that that this group didn't have technology, and because of our role as navigators working within the rapid response, they had access to demographics. So we knew everything about their education. We could sit down and put a plan together. We got the colleges on board to talk to this worker group about ESL. We knew they didn't have access to computers, so we went to them on site, kept them safe, kept our staff safe. And then we actually will be, for the first time, setting up a technology workshop where these workers will be able to get their computers. We'll log them onto the ESL websites, because as you know, college is all done online right now. So we will help them through that process to get comfortable before we send them home. And if nothing else, they get their ESL and they have access to technology that they've never had before. That makes them even more employable just in those things.
Yeah, and no, that's great. And one of the things, really figuring out how to help these communities could be crucial. Equity is now kind of a hot term, but most people don't know how to do equity worth a damn, and most governments don't know how to do equity worth a damn. They say that they were going to try, and it doesn't happen. And we have to think outside the box, right, and really break down the barriers. I taught a course at LA Trade Tech in the labor studies program regarding using technology, and some people didn't know where to put even the email address into the box. So anything that relies too heavily, any program relies too heavily on the use of email to get them signed up is inherently inequitable, in my opinion. Love to kind of work with all of you to, when it comes to the reauthorization of the TAA program, how do we take some of your lessons learned and craft the program to better fit the American workforce that is evolving and changing? With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gomez. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, a lot of detail on the trade assistance program. I really deeply appreciate the perspective of the witnesses and the way that the committee has dealt to try and flesh out those concerns. It highlights the need for a robust program for workers, firms, farmers, communities that are negative impacted to be able to retool and compete in the global economy. The witnesses were terrific. We look forward to following up with you. You help us build a record that will enable us, I think, to move forward fairly quickly in terms of the reauthorization. Be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. These questions and your answers will all be part of the formal hearing record that we will use as we move forward with reauthorization. Again, thank you for your patience. A couple of technical glitches, but I think it was well worth it, and I really appreciate your making the hearing successful. Thank you very much, and we stand adjourned.